In our industry, especially, whether it's architecture, engineers, construction, there are phrases and words that are heavily overused, like innovation or, trusted advisor. Sounds really nice, feel good, but you have to back it up. I think about our primary industry research across all the verticals in professional services, and one very consistent thread for the last 10 years has been a decline in client loyalty, that they're more skeptical, they're less likely to just say, this is a great thing and I'm just in it for the long haul. Greenwashing is a great example, thinking of, is this just a lot of bluster? Is this a lot of noise? How can I get to the truth? There's a lot more emphasis on that style of evaluation now than ever. We've learned through experience, if you go out and just make a lot of noise about something that's not authentic, it might be a short-term gain, but it will come back to bite you.
Before we go into the podcast, if you could just go and rate this show on whichever platform you're listening to it, it makes a huge difference to the podcast, the amazing conversations we get to have, and the incredible guests we're able to get on the podcast. So it's probably not something you would think about, but if you could just go rate the show, follow it, or share an episode, it does make a huge difference to the show. Thank you so much. In a world increasingly facing the challenges of climate change, with the Building Green podcast, we will dive deep into the intersection of architecture, design, urbanism, and environmental responsibility. I'm Ladina Schipp, your host. I've been an architect and building site manager for the past 10 years. During my studies at ETH in Switzerland, as well as in my working environment, I've had many touchpoints with sustainability, like many of you, I guess. I've also learned to question what I've been told, which is why I decided to go deeper into the topic and uncover what sustainability actually means. My mission is to highlight the transformative power of sustainable architecture, not just as a practice, but as a catalyst for broader societal change. Subscribe for more of our content and enjoy the show. This one shift in how you talk about your business could bring in massive growth, and Karl Feldman is going to explain how. He helps architecture, engineering, and consulting firms turn their expertise into business growth. As a managing partner at Hinge Marketing, he uses research and not just guesswork to show companies how to stand out, attract the right clients, and prove their value without relying on empty buzzwords. This episode was especially interesting to me because, as some of you might know, I'm also the co-founder of a marketing agency for architects and interior designers called Market Your Architecture. Karl and I discussed why most firms fail at marketing and how to fix it, the key to make sustainability a selling point for those clients who don't really care about it, and how to tell if a company is actually being sustainable or just greenwashing. He also explains why small firms have actually an advantage over big corporations and how they can use it to compete. So if you want to learn how to market your business better and how to communicate your value, this episode is for you. Karl, thanks so much for joining me today. You're a slightly different guest than we usually have on the podcast, and I truly believe our listeners will learn a lot from this conversation. But before we dive in, could you tell me a bit about your background?
I got my start, I like to say, I was pitching to venture capital investors before I could drink. And I ended up going to school for computer science, started in technology, did software development, which taught me that there were other things that I wanted to pursue more, the business around technology, what it can enable. And, I spent some time in media, B2C companies, big global brands like Herman Miller, Harley Davidson, and then eventually found my way into professional services. And interestingly enough, half of my family are engineers. So, of course, I ended up working in architecture, engineering, consulting firms, but more on the MarTech, marketing, branding side, research, and have continued that. And I found my people here at Hinge. I'm now a managing partner here at Hinge Marketing, and we do research, marketing, branding, the whole assortment of things. But it keeps me interested and engaged. I'm able to keep pace keep a pace that I enjoy and kind of stay ahead of the curve and help a lot of the professional services firms that they're big and it's a different kind of game than business to consumer or business to business, because people and expertise are really the solution that your clients are looking for. So it's been interesting. I mean, our founders run the gamut from tech to research, um, behavioral scientists. So I've kind of found my academic home here, trying to, crack the code on what buyers are looking for and how expertise is, made visible in the world, and, how we can engage in the community with like all kinds of things like climate change and helping to support the awesome organizations that we work with. So it's interesting. I found an interesting home and I get to meet interesting folks like yourself. So thank you for having me.
I mean, you have a much bigger impact when you work in your field B2B than if you were working directly with one little customer, which also has an impact, but you have a much bigger impact. For those who are not familiar with Hinge Marketing, can you introduce me to the firm and what's your mission? How do you help companies communicate their impact?
Sure. 20 some years ago, before I joined, Hinge started as a more traditional marketing and research agency. And then about 15 years ago, they decided to focus in on professional services because through research, we identified this is an underserved market. Marketing, research, like the rest of the world is engaged in, was a little bit behind. The challenge was, so were the budgets, the budgets and buy-in for how do you market, how do you create visibility, very much a field of dreams approach. Build it and they will come, right? You refer, and if you do good work, you'll get good business. We thought that there was opportunity there. So that's really where we started. And we've got now, I think, close to 70,000 some firms in our research data set of professional services and their audiences. And one of the cores to that when we started was, what are the fastest growing, most profitable, top level, whether it's management consulting like the big four you might know, or innovative tech firms, what are they doing differently from everybody else? And how can we take that and put it to good use across the community? And how do we engage with, all kinds of firms, USGBC, LEAD, and Envision. I know thinking about like climate change and things, part of our mission is just elevating all of the community in visibility and frankly value. I mean, it's such I don't know about architects, but engineers, construction, there's a lot of, our service, it's so technical, so advanced, but they almost feel like it's a commodity, and it's not. So I think kind of breaking that and, the whole architecture, engineering community together, I think there's opportunity to really level up the understanding just, in the regular world. You see all these buildings here. Who knows, like all of the tech that goes into that, Internet of Things. There's so much advancement going on now. It's kind of cool. So we find ourselves like research. How do we help these organizations brand? How do you get that message out in the world? That's really what we do.
That's really cool. And you've worked with companies that have a massive sustainability impact because they are huge. But still, you told me that public focus is often on small things like coffee cups.
That's right.
How do you shift the conversation to the bigger picture?
So I think, a lot of it is proof points and also engagement with the media, frankly. I mean, especially now with social media, I think the average person tunes into the things that they're interested in, right? You build kind of a knowledge base or a sphere around you of the things you're interested in, and it can become an echo chamber. So how do you get through that? Kind of showing the invisible things that are behind the scenes that make a great impact, whether it's, it's corporate sustainability, like, what coffee cups, what we do as a company, or the fact that, an environmental consulting agency may capture how many billion tons of carbon through their work, what they may be innovating or helping design. And landfills or monitoring systems. There are so many things that have an impact at scale. We're looking for the ways, how do we connect that kind of expertise with the rest of the world when you're watching TV or, you're watching YouTube? What might help connect?
So let's take, for example, an architecture firm, a medium-sized or like, let's say 20 to 30 people architecture firm. What strategy would you advise them to go, like educate strongly on social media, or what strategy would you recommend them to go?
Well, I wish there was one good answer for that. It's really different depending on the firm and the experts at the firm, but I think the first place to look is actually at the expertise, especially talking about news. Everybody's talking about AI, the investment, all of these things. Just like the technologies before, it's as strong as the people that are in the loop in a lot of ways. So I think starting with the experts, their personality, their skill sets, what actually they are naturally passionate about or good at doing. Some people may be, amazing talkers, networkers. They're comfortable in a public space, public speaking. Others, you would not be able to get them anywhere near a convention like that, but they're amazing writers, technical or otherwise. So sometimes leaning into what is a natural skill set and focusing on how can you expose that expertise to a broader audience, that's kind of at the core of any kind of intentional system that we would recommend. But it really now, I think on one hand, it's a great opportunity. On the other hand, it's challenging. There is no single space to go. Social media doesn't work without educational content behind it, without a well-crafted position or consistent message that's relevant to the audience. It doesn't work without understanding if you're actually hitting the mark, metrics, analysis, those types of things. On one hand, the barrier to entry to understand these things is lower, but it is kind of a complicated world. So I think starting with what you're passionate about, starting with the expertise that really gets you going is the place to start, and then figure out what kind of experts you have. I mean, we've written books about this, but it's, you break it into categories. Is it, I am a disciplined focus? Am I a contrarian? Do I like to find the opposite points of everything? Or do I bridge two different disciplines or audiences together? There are different kinds of experts, but tap into that natural strength and then find a way to connect with the audiences through multiple channels and find ways to measure if you're being successful at it.
So kind of understanding your unique selling proposition, what makes you you, what makes you different from your competition, and then going really strong into that.
That's right. And it's some, honest looking at yourself or yourselves in the mirror, especially in small practices, partner driven practices, being really honest with yourself about what you may be strong at and what might be your deficiencies so you can really lean into the strengths. I think that's key. And you said it exactly. It's how do you differentiate, right? What if you are passionate about something, find the things that are different. It's, I'll write a coffee table book one of these days about true differentiators. Like, I don't want to be innovative, right? I aim to be mediocre, just good enough. That would be different. Everybody says those buzzwords and it means nothing without the backup. So think about proof points too. If you had to prove like, we are really good at this, tell me how.
Tell me more about the coffee table book, or more specifically about the key differentiators. What are some practical key differentiators you have in mind?
I love my seat. I don't want to say this disparagingly because it's true in a lot of cases, but I think in our industry, especially, whether it's architecture, engineers, construction, there are phrases and words that are heavily overused, like innovation or, trusted advisor. Those things may be true and they're really valuable. You don't want to be commodity. Who would argue with that? But they also are kind of like I don't know, like Frosted Flakes. It's like a puff of calories. It sounds really nice, feel good, but you have to back it up. And maybe on the other side, I've thought about, I need to be more comfortable saying it because innovation does matter. You need to be driving forward, but just thinking of how you can say that in a, specific way. That's why I joke about. I mean, it's the opposite of those things would be differentiators, right? We don't go for the top talent, just good enough. We've got real, B level folks. Our people are good enough. Those kinds of things. If you're saying things like that, think about the other side of it and how kind of silly sometimes that might sound. Like, no, we don't believe in innovation. We just good enough and staying where we are is great. That might be a good litmus test. Like, it sounds good, makes us feel good, but yeah.
It's a cool exercise. So whoever's listening and is kind of trying to find their positioning or their marketing language. So really make a list of what makes you you. And even I just recently listened or read an article from Stephen Bartlett, the Diary of a CEO podcast host. And he said talked about skill stacking. So what are skills that you have that might not be in the same field, but that bring a value your competitors might not have? So if you're an architect and you have built homes in the past, or you have a sustainability certificate, that sets you apart from a normal architect or an average architect.
That's right, Ladina. And, so we've come up with this concept for professional services, the visible expert, right? And what kind of expert are you? What you just described, that's what we would call the bridge, right? So bridging two different solutions or audiences or concepts together. I'm sure some of the listeners, if you think about yourself, if you find yourself kind of negotiating or explaining between, two worlds, you might be a real powerful bridge expert. If maybe you find yourself or you don't shy away from conflict, right? You think discourse is where it's at. That's where we're going to get to the good stuff. Let's just be direct. You might be a contrarian, right? That's a more rare type of expert to rise, but some are very good about it. It's controversial. If you can play both sides of it, I mean, go for it. I think being genuine these days, that's another one of those differentiators. Be authentic, but really knowing yourself and being unafraid to share that and connect it to your professional life, that can be really powerful. I mean, if you think of some of the biggest visible experts on the global stage, right? Remember Steve Jobs' kind of zone of distortion. He's a pretty unique character. Not everybody's buddy, not everybody's friend, but he wore a lot of that on his sleeve. I mean, I don't think had a lot of doubts about what he was about. And sometimes that's really hard to do. That's a lot easier said than done.
And what do you think about this common fear that people have by showing who they really are or niching down on their ideal clients, being very specific, kind of that fear of losing a lot of potential clients? What do you say about that?
I think there is a balance there. You don't want to be so controversial that you're alienating a part of your audience that you really care about, or, you're veering into offensive, worlds. But I do remember there was actually a conference that I was at. I was doing a keynote, and we were talking about employer branding, right? Who are we as an employer, right? What is our brand? What do we believe in? And, there was a lot of talk. It doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you're on. DEI was a big thing. And, what do we believe about this? How much do we believe in diversity programs and so on? And some clearly did not. And some of the questions came out that were very direct. And I heard a gasp in the audience, like, whoa. Somebody says, I just don't believe in that. And the answer was, be genuine with that, because if you're not, someone will join your firm and they will find out what your true culture is. So it is a balance. maybe don't want to be so provocative that it, alienates a segment of your audience and even peripheral parts of your audience. But you also don't want to be inauthentic. If you have a belief, you have a culture, you should be pretty transparent about that, because that will have other impacts. Once a client or a recruit comes in and actually finds out what the reality is, it was a lot of effort for naught. So better to position with honesty. A good position is as much about what you are as much as it's about what you are not. So consider, I think, both sides of that.
And those who are bought in are much more bought in than if you're kind of neutral.
That's right. That's right. If you're just kind of beige, you blend in with the rest of the world.
I would love to talk about greenwashing with you. So sustainability marketing can be tricky, and some companies do great work but struggle with their visibility, while others do a lot, do little, but talk a lot. How do we bridge that gap?
Boy, that's a really good question. I wish I had a perfect solution. I'll kind of take a different perspective on there, or come at this from the audience's point of view. I think on one hand, like I was speaking about earlier, a lot of the technologies and communication and media, I mean, the machines work faster than the human animal. So the kind of focus and categorization to get attention, that's the primary job of these machines and communication tools. Within that, though, I think the audiences, although maybe they're not up to the speed of, with the latest AI or algorithm, they are smarter than they used to be, more skeptical than they used to be. I mean, I think about our primary industry research across all the verticals in professional services, and one very consistent thread for the last 10 years has been a decline in client loyalty, that they're more skeptical, they're less likely to just say, this is a great thing and I'm just in it for the long haul. I think there's been a lot of changes, or, greenwashing is a great example, thinking of, is this just a lot of bluster? Is this a lot of noise? How can I get to the truth? There's a lot more emphasis on that style of evaluation now than ever. I think it's, as humans trying to understand the world around us or make a good decision, it's harder in some ways, but I think that's also creating a response in this, kind of lack of loyalty and skepticism. We look at it as, it's human first, right? What's the narrative? What are the proof points behind it? We've learned through experience, if you go out and just make a lot of noise about something that's not authentic, it might be a short-term gain, but it will come back to bite you. I think it's whether you're trying to game a search algorithm or focus on a topic like, we're super environmental, but you're just burying negative articles, not a great long-term strategy. I don't know if that's a solution, more of a statement about the world, but
it's a statement about the world. I can live with that. And how can, for example, a homeowner tell if a company is truly sustainable or just using greenwashing tactics? Do you have like some buzzwords that you recognize?
I would look for peer review, and actually, I mean, I'm probably biased because I index heavily on research, right? And researching, and one of my passions is learning how to learn. But I think the more educated you are as a consumer, the better. And, in my statement of the world, along with that, transparency is greater than it's ever been if you know where to look. Don't just see what's put in front of you. Actually go out and look for peer review, look for proof points that demonstrate, this is a environmentally conscious firm, organization, product. Look for the proof points, not just the statements. But part of my statement on the world, I think that people are more and more skeptical about what is real, what's not, what's a marketing message, what's not. Although, I don't know. It depends. Volume sometimes overcomes. That's the downside of it.
Yeah, I guess the skepticism is growing or increasing because you don't know which sources are real research or just fake information. Yeah. What's the most controversial or challenging thing you've done in your work around sustainability messaging?
I think there have been teams that we've worked with where their first inclination is to message, right? If we buy more voice, if we go out with a stronger message, that's going to help us say what we need to say. I am trying to think of a case where we didn't get to the right place. I'm having trouble because I think that's part of the way we work. We're maybe a little different as an agency. We're not just, oh yeah, that's a great color. I'm glad you like that. Let's go with that. We want to see the stats. We are always, maybe we're contrarians. We love discourse. We've had controversy, I think, in a policy, right? Policy beliefs or politics. I do think it's important in a lot of ways, like you were mentioning. You don't want to alienate your audiences. We are neutral. We are open to conversation and make the space for different beliefs. But I think we emphasize the things that we work on. In our experience, the most powerful things are things that you can prove, right? You have proof points and stats. And if you can't back that up and it just sounds good, we're skeptical. We don't think that makes a good differentiation, a good marketing message. I think especially to the audiences we serve, because we're not direct to consumer. So it's kind of like a Russian doll, the nest, right? We're consultants to consultants, and our consultants' audiences often are consultants and specialists themselves, whether they're with a government agency or, even teaming partners and things. So the bluster only goes so far, and we hear that directly in research all the time. So I think we think of it more as discourse, maybe because we're contrarians, or maybe I'm a contrarian, but I can't think of where it was really controversial, where it's, we've done something we don't believe is right, or something like that. We have discovered things through research that I think have surprised clients, surprised us, but we find value. I like to call it bookends, right? There might be a positive and a negative. That tells you that what is in between is really important. So you should listen to both and find out where you sit, right? That's the biggest controversy. I mean, those are probably not easy presentations or, reports to deliver, but I personally find them as some of the most impactful when you find very contrasting viewpoints on things. And that's often the truth is right smack in the middle of those.
If you're enjoying the show, I have a small favor to ask that would mean the world to me. By rating and sharing the podcast, you're helping us grow and spreading our mission of making sustainability really desirable and cool to a wider audience. Besides of that, imagine impressing your colleagues with the latest insights on sustainable architecture. So make sure you follow the podcast and become the most informed in the room. Thank you so much for your support. Let's talk about the role of policy. Do you think policymakers should take more responsibility in enforcing sustainable practices, or should companies and consumers lead the way?
That's a good example of maybe why not both? I think there are places where I think policy makes a difference in beginning a process, but I do think at least in our society, like American society, kind of economic drive, practical financial sense, it has to be a component. It's very difficult to carry solely on belief without driving that. If you think of organizations or companies as a person, as an entity, they exist to create value. So in a lot of cases, now, not for profit, mission focus, that's different. And that's another way to bring that into the fold to help to drive the mission. I'm happy and talk about our mission. Like, we're happy that we've worked with some of the great not-for-profit organizations around environmental service and things that are objective and academic in review, whether that's, USGBC, Sustainable Institute, for non-inhabited, airports and train stations and all kinds of interesting things. Those kinds of credentials, accreditations, they can be very rigorous and can help to, I think what you were talking about before, help a consumer, if it's a business or a consultancy, understand objectively where something sits so they can make their own judgment that's consistent with their goals. So I think, okay, maybe I introduced a third. There's policy, regulations, there's not-for-profits that are mission-driven, community-driven, and the companies themselves. There are paths, I think, combining all three.
I just watched a Netflix documentary. I don't know if you've seen it, about Amazon, where it's all about that Amazon was optimizing their sales process to the T. Like, they were optimizing everything to make sure you buy more, you buy more, you buy more. And they make it super easy for you to buy more. But nobody ever thought about where all this stuff that we buy goes.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about.
Oh, you have to watch it. It's really good. So I want to talk with you about this. Well, you haven't seen the movie, or the documentary, but I'm sure you know what I'm pointing out. The question is, obviously now the whole marketing language has to shift somewhere else to not really buy more, but tell me where does
create the value. Yeah. Let me separate business and personal. Personally, if you talk to my family, my son, they'll tell you how much I enjoy upcycling, reusing, doing all of these things. I know exactly which documentary you were talking about, and I stopped part of the way through because to me it felt a little sensational in places, and I think it had some really good points in the beginning, but it was almost like it was a little bit meta because it was using some of the same tactics that it was talking about, right? Like,
that was the point.
I know, but I don't know. I think that there is a path there. I think, and I'm biased because marketing, branding, I think the more voices there are, if there is a belief, and I think it, become more apparent just in our lives, if there is a belief and a mission to be more efficient, create less waste to deal with in the first place, that should be something that starts to rise up in the global conversation. And I have to hope that it will, and it does, and it has to find balance with the other kind of constructs that we have, because, Amazon is not going to turn around tomorrow and say, we want to be an unprofitable business. There is some creative engineering to work on that process, not just to, consume, but how are some of the cycles? And I often find myself wishing for some products or systems that I see to be what they say they are, and sometimes they're not yet. It's always, on one hand, it's always difficult for me to hear like, oh, stories about kids, what have you. My son has like a little engineering gene in him too. And he did, for a school project, he went to recycling facilities. He went to landfills. He interviewed like owners. He's 13, so, just focused on certain things. But his big takeaway was, wow, all of these things we're spending so much time recycling, they're just going right into the landfill. They're not going, it makes us feel good, but the reality doesn't match the message. And I think there was some truth to that. I think the more that there's the system is complicated, right? There's the messaging, the branding, the motivation, and there's documentaries on this too, but following up with what's actually happening. That's where, personally, I do feel good working with a lot of organizations that, again, quietly, nobody knows about this, but the projects that they're working on work to mitigate the spread of, contamination from landfills. There's so much incredible technology, and, it would be great to get to the source, right? To have less of a problem to deal with. And we have to do everything we can, I think. That's just personal. But, I think it also has to make business sense too. That's the challenge.
You've worked with a lot of big companies. Have you seen kind of a shift over the last, let's say, 10 years where they wanted to sell as much as possible and maybe now they are trying to sell more consciously?
I think it's less applicable in the business lines that I serve now because what we deal with mostly is it's professional service. So it's thought, it's expertise, it's advisory, it's value from that, right? More than products. We actively, and we turn down work all the time that is more product based. And so, oh no, there's good service support behind it, but you're selling a product. That's not what we focus on. So I think it's a little different, but I do think like some of the balancing act has been very apparent, right? We have many clients, many organizations that are working through energy transition, and all sides of that equation are important. And frankly, no matter what you say, you're going to alienate one part of the audience. So where's the needle to thread there? And as much as, one part of the audience would like to flip a switch and everything changes, probably not realistic. And maybe if another audience wants things to stay as they are, that's probably not in the cards either. So balancing that message, I find a lot of personal satisfaction in that, but I think there's a reality to wrestle with as well. It's that practicality and also values and authenticity.
The more we see something like, let's say, sustainable buildings or any ad that you see more often, the more you kind of desire it. How do we make sustainability aspirational?
That's a great question. I think there's lots of ways, right? I think in some ways the technology and communications around that in some ways can make that easier because you have more access and more visibility than ever before. So if you are able to balance, practical lifestyle, a path, and you're able to message to that, you can connect with audiences better than ever. I think, and again, I will totally admit I'm biased. It starts with good research and understanding. Who are your audiences that you're speaking to, and how do you share that with them? And what might be attractive to you might be different than what's attractive to me. So how do you balance those things? I think being objective in that way, if that is the mission, that's the goal, to make sustainability more attractive, you have to have a practical solution, and you have to be able to message to your different audiences authentically, right? If someone, who knows why they might be against an initiative or not, but if you understand why, then you can have a conversation about it. There's my comment on the world. I wish there were more conversation. There's more opportunity for conversation. I think that's unfortunately lacking in a lot of areas. I'm probably biased sitting here right outside of DC, but it seems like people are a lot more similar than we think, and yet they don't want to talk to each other. So I think knowing your audience, knowing how to speak to them and what will actually connect, that's important. And what I said earlier, I think is true as well. Be genuine, be real about it, be practical.
And what advice would you give someone, for example, an architect who wants to know how to make their sustainable designs more appealing to clients who don't prioritize sustainability?
Great question. So I think if they do not prioritize that, what are the practical measures that they do care about? Life cycle cost, right? Often sustainable practices, sustainable design, it may not pay off on day one, or it may be the more expensive option day one, but perhaps 3 years, 5 years into the future, you've saved on maintenance, you've saved on energy costs. As energy costs naturally escalate, that would become a much easier sell. I mean, it kind of connects to what I was just saying, where understanding your audience and what they actually do care about, that's what you should focus on as a design professional, thinking about, well, what is it? If not, it's not my beliefs, it's how do I connect my belief to their priorities. Easier said than done, but I have seen many instances where that has been extremely successful. And it's not just fluff, it's provable. But it takes some thought, some understanding, and some objectivity to get there. I think that's the challenge.
And what's the biggest mistake most companies make when marketing their work?
That they can do everything themselves. I think, it's interesting as a consultants, and I'm probably my own worst culprit too, because, it's once you think you can engineer one thing, you can engineer everything. I think being open to different experiences or advisory outside of your domain of expertise, that's what we see hold most firms back, especially in that growing phase or the small mid-size phase. I think it may be coupled with like a feeling of initiatives or projects not being fully in control of things or not always having the answer. But I never want to be the smartest person in a room. I want to have smart people around me. That's going to get the best result. I think the more we feel like that and are kind of humble in that way, I think that's a high growth hallmark. They're curious. They're open to make connections to different perspectives, different expertise. That's an unbeatable combo.
And what advice would you give small firms on how they can compete with big names in their industry?
Well, first of all, I'll say that the grass is always greener on the other side. Now, large firms look at small firms and wish they had the speed and nimbleness and lack of red tape. And small firms look at the large firms and say, my gosh, I can't do all these things in one day. I have no resources. How can I prioritize my work? And, this Goliath, I can't compete. I think it goes back to that, looking yourself in the mirror. What can you do? What are your priorities? And what access do you have to catalysts? I think catalysts for your business, there is no cheat code. And I've been approached by some podcasts that in the interview, what's the cheat? What's my cheat code for 10x growth? I'm sorry, there's not really one. I wish there was, but there's not. I think the answer is different depending on where you sit. But I would say that being open to outside connections and possibilities while at the same time being disciplined not to chase down every shiny thing is the balance. But it comes back to, and I'll be transparent, I'm biased towards research and data. So understanding who you are, who your audiences are, that's a good balance to what you may feel, right? You might have a strong passion, which is important too, but balance it with discipline. If you have a good hunch on something, how short could you make that loop of understanding of, was my hunch correct or not? In some ways, it's letting go of ego too, because I'm not saying that I'm great at this, by the way, but I am usually happy to be wrong if there's an alternate solution. If there's no solution, I'm grumpy. But if my idea was wrong, that's okay, great. Let's try something else until we find one that sticks.
Karl, you talk a lot about research. Now, can you give me 3 to 5 non-negotiables that have to be researched?
Buying behavior of your audience. What is important to them at what stage of their evaluation and selection process, and why? It's different. I will guarantee that there will be surprises in there. Good, and this is the hardest part to define, well-designed qualitative research around how your brand or solution is perceived objectively, how you perceive it and how your audience perceives it, and what matches and what doesn't. That would be number 2. And number 3, if you're an architect, professional services, employer branding research, understanding what your idea of top talent, like what kind of talent your organization needs, understanding where they are, what they care about, even the language that they speak. That's number 3, and that's unique. Professional services, you can't do anything without considering the 2 sides, right? If I can create the growth, create the work, I need the talent to deliver or it stops. You're going to hit the ceiling if you can't attract the clients. So the good news is often those things are the same. Prospects, clients are looking for some of the same things that your top talent might be too. They want to grow their voice. They want to be seen and visible. Well, that can help you get in front of your clients too.
And where do they find these data?
The best way is to engage with an expert and do it for your own audiences. If you do, I will put out a pitch for us, hingemarketing.com. We do give away a lot of research that, think about it as educational to begin with, how the research is structured, what kind of insights there are. And know that, we also market ourselves too. So we're picking out highlights, right? What is important for your organization? It's good food for thought, but digging into, what's your perception? What kinds of things do you need to emphasize to attract talent? What are you missing in the buying behavior? Those things are often pretty specific, but starting with good industry research and also looking at like organizations that are, respected in your practice. AIA has some great studies there as well. We work with research teams there. Look at the research and see, if nothing else, it's a great starting point to think that way. It's not something like, I'm just going to ask my people this question. The whole structure of what you say or don't say in research, or what kind of channels you're using, whether it's surveys or more passive media and analytics. There's a lot of science and design to it, but I think starting with that and thinking about things that way I can't encourage that enough. Start reading some studies. Think about how you might apply that kind of methodology to your own business. It's something that's more accessible than ever now.
That's a good answer. Now, what's one thing you hope listeners take away from this conversation?
Be genuine. I think, understand what you care about, but not to the exclusion of what your audiences care about, whether that's, your talent or your next client. It's important to understand who you are, how you're perceived, but it's just as important to be able to, and if you're that kind of expert, it'll come naturally, bridge to your audiences, meet them in what they care about. But, I think you asked a great question of, well, what if someone just doesn't believe what I believe? Find out what they believe in. Where's the connection? If it doesn't connect, that might not be a good fit. But if there is a connection point, and there often is, find what that is and be able to speak to that objectively. It doesn't mean that you're not genuine to your beliefs, but you've found a point of connection. So be genuine, look for the connections. That's easier said than done. Let go of your egos a little bit. Be happy to be wrong if there's a good proof point and progress involved.
That's great. Thank you so much, Karl. If our listeners want to follow your work, where can they find you and download the resources?
Yeah, I'm fairly easy to find. Karl with a K, Feldman. You can Google me. But look at hingemarketing.com and you'll find all kinds of resources. We like to talk, so there's plenty of articles and blog posts on there. But that's a good place. You know, we've got books and free articles that you can download, some research, but also look at AEC communities, organizations. We post quite a lot of content with them as well.
Cool. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Ladina. Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
A huge thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to the podcast to support me and so you don't miss an episode. And while you're there, I'd also be so grateful if you could rate and review us. If you have any guest suggestions or any feedback, you can find me on the socials at Ladina Schipf. Thanks.